Okay.
Hey, I'm here with Rob McGuire. We're following up on a topic Rob spoke at the 2024 Officer NCO School, and it's important enough that we wanted to record this on video and have this be available for everyone to see. So good morning, Rob. Thanks for joining us here.
Morning, Tom. Thanks for the privilege of allowing me to do this presentation.
Well, it's a real honor on our part. So hey, just going to reinforce, if there's information you see in this presentation, then do feel free to reach out to Rob or myself. We can either share the deck or the specific slides. And hey, the magic of YouTube, you can always pause on a slide and digest what's there. You can take a screenshot. There's lots of ways to capture and archive this information. So, Rob, I'm going to open up your deck. Give me 1 second to share screen here.
Mm-hmm.
And away we go. So when you want to advance the slide, just give me a prompt and then I'll move on to the next slide.
Sounds good. So yes, Tom, as you said, this was initially a presentation at the Officer NCO School. Um, Basically, we were trying to get this done in a short period of time. You'll see a number of musical references on these slides. We all have a soundtrack to our life, and a lot of my life is steeped in music. So you're going to see some references to music through this. Were we to have been able to have used PowerPoint, I would have had some music at the Fort George show, but not at that point and not now either. So anyways, carry on, please. So this is my background. I'm very, very fortunate to have had a lot of experience, a lot of training. I am by no means an expert. I rely on the experts to teach me. And basically what I'm doing is I'm passing along the benefit of their education, experience, and intellect. Yeah, I have experience, but I know where all of that has come from, and it's come largely from the excellent training that I've had. Next, please.
Yeah, just one moment. What on this slide, Rob skipped over this pretty quick, but I think we're really fortunate to have his remarkable expertise and experience to be in the ranks with us. And I think we've all seen situations where uh, Rob has been the first responder and really helped out in scenarios. So thank you for what you do at events, Rob, and thank you once again for doing this with us here.
Pleasure. Basically, I wanted to take a moment to identify the safety issues within Crown Forces in terms of our people and the environment, because both are changing. How are we going to deal with these issues, and how do we keep our people safe? This isn't about politics. This isn't about education or fear. A couple of the leading minds in the circles in Canada are even debating now whether the heat spell that we're going through presently is a result of global warming. So these are debates that are going to keep going on, and it doesn't really matter to us. It matters that we're in the middle of a very hot spell, and we're going to have a very hot summer, and we need to be able to be prepared for that and know how to deal with things when they come up. Next, please.
Yeah, and I think that's an important reality, right? We don't have to get into the debate of climate change. We've all
Absolutely not.
experienced events with extreme heat, and I vividly recall from a couple of years ago an incident where an individual went down with heat stress, and it really frightened me to see how far gone they were and how much work and effort it took to bring this individual back to a kind of a ready state or to get him steady. So it's a very important topic, and as we got our July and August events ahead of us. So
Yeah, and maybe we'll refer back to that particular event a couple of times because the mitigating factors that went into the treatment of that man brought him back. He was able to come back, and he was absolutely fine. So we can refer back to that in this presentation and the next one. So next one, please.
you're on the next slide, Rob.
Oh, I am. Oh, look at that. So risk factors in the hobby. What do we need to think about? Well, age. What's the average age of a reenactor? I would have loved to have done a survey. I didn't take the time to ask the units, but I think we're looking 50s to 60s. As you get older, come the comorbidities, and a comorbidity is basically what illnesses do you carry around with you? So diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular, respiratory illnesses. And you can have 20-year-olds with that, but you're going to see it far more often in people who are older. What's the fitness level of a reenactor? And do they have a fitness routine? And we're not talking about people who are going out and getting ready for Ironman competitions and running marathons. Do you have a basic level of fitness? And then here's the other risk factor that we have, that it's not just the personnel, it's the location where we are. What's the proximity to the local EMS? It's one thing to do a reenactment at Fort York when you're in downtown Toronto and you've got fire trucks responding to calls. The paramedics are there fairly quickly. It's entirely another thing. We're out at, say, Longwoods. You're relying on a volunteer fire station 10 minutes away. Ambulances that hopefully aren't waiting to offload patients. So now they've got to call in another vehicle from 10, 15 minutes away. This is why it's important that we are able to assess the risk, mitigate it through actions on our own, and be ready to treat patients should they occur. Next, please.
And then environmental factors. Sorry, Rob, you got temperature. I'm assuming AQI is air quality index, and then weather,
yes.
right?
Yeah. So the environmental factors being what are we dealing with in terms of temperature? The air quality index, the example of that being the smoke from the fires from out west last year, and just the general pollution that will layer into the atmosphere when it gets very, very hot. And then weather, is it going to be is it going to be very hot? Is it going to be humid? Is it going to be cool with a nice breeze? So those are all things that need to be checked. So what I did was I broke this down into what I figured were the adjustable and the unadjustable factors. And when you look at the adjustable factors, I thought, okay, the weight of the reenactor, but it's not just the physical weight. It was looking at, well, how much do we actually carry when we go into the field? The other adjustable factor is our level of fitness. The unadjustable factors, things that we can't mitigate, things that we can't control, but that we can mitigate, would be temperature, the individual age of the reenactor, and the average age of reenactors, because within certain units, you might have somebody who's also quite young, and heat can hit the young just as badly as it hits the older reenactor.
Especially if they don't take care of themselves at an event. It's funny, more often than not, it's the younger reenactors I've seen having to drop out of a parade or an event or what have you. So
that's true. There's always the myth of invincibility in someone who's a lot younger. So looking at that first adjustable factor was the weight. And again, I said, this isn't about the personal weight. This is, how much do we carry when we go into the field? And so what I did was I looked at a number of sports. I looked at the gear that they pack, and you can see that it's wide ranging. So you can have hockey where, a goalie will wear 50 pounds of gear, whereas a runner like me, I wear 5 pounds. And so it's there's a wide range. If we flip through to the next slide, you'll see that we pack about 30 pounds or 13 and a half kilos of gear when we go out. Now, obviously, some units won't wear as much gear. Others will wear, what we do in the Royals. But the point is, it's great to have a fitness routine, but then you have to take into consideration that when you're going out for a reenactment, you're going to have to then worry about 30 more pounds of gear. So do you factor that into your fitness routine? Do you carry a knapsack with some extra weight? Or are you just cognizant of the fact that, okay, it's time to go. I got to put on 30 more pounds. Now I really have to watch myself to make sure that I'm not stressing my body too badly. Thanks. The idea of BMI always comes up. I'm not here to debate whether or not it matters. What I'm trying to show through this next slide, and it would be the slide that comes after this, is that BMI does matter. But BMI doesn't matter as much if you're very athletic. What this gentleman did was he looked at 3 sports, which was European football, North American football, and basketball. And when you flip to the next slide, if you could, please, you're going to see that the trend lines that are marked 25, 30, and 35, those are the obesity classes. And these are some of the top athletes that people watch. And a lot of them, if you look to the right of the screen with that dark blue, North American football, they're really overweight, but they're followed by medical professionals. They are followed by sport athletic therapists. So they're monitored. So they are able to be overweight, but still be fit because they have programs that allow them to be fit. Next slide. So in terms of, again, just to reiterate, what do the athletes have that we may not have? Obviously, a lot of them are much younger. They're more fit. They have exposure to nutrition information, coaching, and they're closely monitored by health professionals. In London here, where we have a population of about 450,000, it's estimated that 45,000 or so people do not have a family doctor. So how do you get yourself, how do you even begin to look at being fit or get help for what your problems are if you can't even access basic care? Next. So then the next question became, well, what is 1812 reenacting as a sport? How could you look at it? And it was basically something that came up between European and Canadian football. Periods of calm mixed with periods of intense activity that can be of varying duration. And it's that high stress, that pulse into the run, charge the fort, take the moat, whatever, that can put real stress on your body when you're already stressed with heat and the weight of the extra gear. There's no contact, but it can be very, very hot, as we all know. And in terms of having contact on the field, what we trade for that is possibly very uncertain footing. So there's the challenge of physical injury with that. And there's lots of peripheral activity that can take your attention away from what you're doing and possibly mean that you're not watching where you're going. So the first thing that I always say is go see your family doctor if you're lucky enough to have one, and get a fitness plan created with that person. Maybe you've got a personal trainer. Maybe you go to a gym and you have access to some kind of a service there. What I'm saying is don't start this alone. And when you do go, start slow and fly low. Next. Basically, again, just reiterating that being obese generally means that you have a lower level of fitness, but there are lots of obese people who are marathon runners. I'm obese, and I used to be able to do half marathons. I'm trying to get back into my running. I'm more careful now that I'm older. But the thing is that you can be obese and fit if you have a fitness program. But generally, as they're saying, obesity means that your standard of fitness is probably a lot less. Next. The other thing that mattered in this was something called VO2 max. I know that's a bit of a term. Basically, it's your body's ability to utilize oxygen. And that, again, comes from a fitness program. So what they're really saying in this study is it's not so much your weight, it's your fit level and your ability to process oxygen and glucose to help your body respond in stressful incidents. Next. So basically, are you ready for the physical and mental challenges of the hobby? And next. So what do? Well, as I said, you talk to your doctor about a fitness plan. And is it an order? No, it's a suggestion. Nobody can order you to get fit, but I promise you, you're going to do a lot better if you are fit. And what about the age risk factor? Well, if we said only people who are 30 and younger can be reenactors, then all we'd have really are two baseball teams lining up at, say, Fort Erie because of the age of the reenactors. There wouldn't be that many of us left. So again, it's being able to look at the risk factor and then how do we adapt for that? Next. So we've gone through the risk factors, as I just said. The next big one, of course, is temperature, because that's the unadjustable factor that we really need to focus on. For the next slide, please. The Northern Canada is warming at the rate 4 times the Southern Canada. I had a note in here to check this, and I did check it. That was from a radio interview. from a couple months back, and Canada is warming at roughly double the global rate. But as I said earlier, there are people now that are wondering, is it global warming that's causing the heat issues in Canada? For us, it doesn't matter. We're just in the middle of it, and we've got to be ready for it. Next. This slide looks at the four seasons. I'm not talking about the singing group. We're going back to 1948 when they started taking temperature measurements and recording them and having really good systems of storing data. Going right up to 2022, each dot, so we'll start with the black line running up the center from left to right of each of those slides. Basically, that's the change over time in the temperature. So you can see for winter, for the four seasons, that line rises over a period of about, what's that, about 70 years. And the dots are the individual data points for each year. And if you notice, you're getting a lot more dots on the higher side of that line. That line is just an average. So as we've been going through the years, it's been getting warmer in each of the seasons. Next. So how do we take an eye? How do we determine what the heat risk is? Well, you can look at the temperature, and that's great. That's self-explanatory. You can look at the humidity, which is basically the percentage of water in the air. And why humidity matters is when the air is more humid, the sweat that you produce is less likely to evaporate from your skin and draw away heat. If you can imagine sweat as a volume of weight, one drop of sweat will take away 7 times its weight in heat from your body. So when you're in a humid environment, that's not going to happen as readily. So what happened some time back was some bright minds got together and made this thing called the wet bulb globe temperature index. And all it really is a measure of evaporation. And if we go forward, we're going to see a couple of neat slides that they created for this. What I like about wet bulb globe temperature is that it's not just a temperature chart, but then it's a series of actions that you can take to mitigate for the heat. Next. Composite temperature index, as you'll see. Some scales are centigrade or Fahrenheit. You just have to check your chart that you're going to use. No chart is really wrong, but you want to be able to read it. And some scales look at a color code for urgency. Others just give a number, and I've got examples of both of those. And really and truly, when you have this globe temperature index, it doesn't take away from your obligation to yourself and to your group to prepare yourself for the heat. Next. So this is a chart. It's measured in Celsius. As you can see, it's color-coded. If you look at the left axis, you're looking at the humidity in percent, and the top axis is degrees Celsius. And basically, all you do is you look at the temperature for the day, and you measure that against the humidity, and you come up with a number. And then in that number, as per this chart, you have if it's green, it's normal activity. If it's red, it's maximum practice time. And if it's black, they say, don't even bother going outside. Where a lot of this came out of was the States about 10 to 15 years ago. They had a number of kids dying at football practices. And a lot of it was because they would go out and, we don't want to rest. No water. You're weak if you drink water. There was a mindset. And the idea was that we're going to toughen these kids up. And a number of kids died. And so this is how some of these lessons are learned, is through the unfortunate passing of other individuals. Next. So for that chart that you just had, this is the mitigation. This is the mitigation. Now, interestingly, they've got the temperature measured in Fahrenheit for this one, when the temperature on the chart was Celsius, but it would be a quick and easy conversion because they're using the colors. You go across from the color, you see how much rest you should take. So and how much water you should take in that time. And it just gives you a simple calculation. The real trick to this is not only monitoring the index, but having people ensure that people do rest. And in our hobby, that they kit down and that they drink prior to going out, while they're on the field, and when they're back. Next. This is one that was developed by the Canadian Forces. I like it because it's a little more simple. Now, Tom, do you have a like a pointer available that you can point this out on the slide?
I think that my cursor will show up on the screen. So
Okay,
yeah.
well, let's show people what this really is all about. I'd like you to go down to 95% humidity and about the sixth column in for the number 30. So you see we've got a 30 risk, which we'll get to when we go to the next slide, but we'll not do that now. So we've got very low temperature, 25 degrees Celsius, but 95% humidity. Let's go to the top line. And we'll see 30 under the number 46. So we have very high heat and zero humidity. So what it's saying is throughout this course of this chart, you can have a mix of temperature and humidity to give you the risk factors. And that's why you have to watch this so carefully. It doesn't matter what the temperature is. It doesn't matter what the humidity is alone. It matters what they are in combination. Next slide. And I should tell you, I do like this because it's from the Canadian Forces. This is the chart that then accompanies this. You're looking at the number on the left to give you the risk level, and then you move across. Is it a moderate risk? And then it looks at people who are unacclimatized and acclimatized. And I'm guessing that a lot of this came out of the troops' experience in Afghanistan, where you'd have new troops fresh on the ground who weren't acclimatized to the heat, and people who'd been there for months and they'd been ready for it. It's important to know that in order to be ready to handle new temperature extremes, acclimatization takes us on average 6 weeks. You know for a fact that when the first cold weather hits in November, you've got a jacket on when it's 15 degrees or 10 degrees. And come December, when it's 10 degrees, you're probably out in maybe a short sleeve shirt or a lighter jacket because you're acclimatized to that. So that's why they have these two levels of basically fitness, the status of the personnel, as they say. And then based on the activity that they're doing, they have the work rest cycle and the water intake. I would say that what we do is, if we're drilling and practicing, that's probably a moderate activity. Being in the camp is light, but when we're out in the field, heavy and very heavy activity is what we do. And therefore, when we as officers and NCOs have the responsibility of the people under our command, we have to make sure that they are being careful when they're out, that they are doing the proper things when they come back. And we don't just ask them if they're drinking, we ask them how much they've drunk so that we know they're getting their fluids in. Next. So I'm obviously gotten away from the air, from the heat element. Again, the air quality monitoring, the forest fires. I have to admit that last summer, I never thought in my life I would have to refer to a smoke chart. I'd never even heard of one beforehand. I mean, I'm a 60s baby. I grew up in the Cold War where there was concern about radioactive fallout if the Russians ever attacked. But now we don't worry about that anymore. Now it's forest fires. And smoke and pollution can be a bad factor for people in our hobby if they have respiratory difficulties, if they have a cardiovascular problem as well. Next. So basically, pre-season, what are the responsibilities of everybody in command positions? Well, I know you've already done this already. You've got a wet bulb globe temperature system that you work on, and you take that out with you to events. I have one, and it's basically the idea of, if we pile all the data in together, we've looked at a smoke map, we've listened to what we think the air quality is going to be, and then we remind units the importance of fitness within each unit for each person. Again, it's a volunteer hobby. People can't be made to do it, but they can be told how important this is. And it has to be passed on to the membership, because it's great to have information, but if it's not passed on, the information's useless. And that's preseason. So the next slide is, well, what do we do in the season? So when they have the sergeants meetings and the officers meeting, that this assessment of our risk through temperature and air quality. That's part of the meeting. What are we dealing with? What do we need to tell our people to do? And then the safety measures that are reviewed are passed on to the reenactors at morning orders, battalion safety inspection, each battle, after the battle, before the camp dismisses for the night. That this is constantly reinforced. In my way of thinking, it's possible that we can avoid heat illness in all our people. It's still going to happen. I'm sure it will be. I'm not saying that it's the fault of anybody if it does happen, but I'd like to think that we could get and go through very hot events. And although people will be uncomfortable, they're not being carted out by the paramedics. And you can see the things that we have to do. Fluids, nutrition. Nutrition is equally as important. Got to get the potassium, the sodium, the chlorides back in so that your muscles work properly. Cooling down, whether that's sending somebody off to an air-conditioned unit, like the museum at Fort Erie. Kitting down, watching each other. Cooling down also includes soaking yourself with water. It's not just fluids in, but it's fluids on. And that's in the next presentation as well. And maybe this is a good time to think about that gentleman from Chrysler's Farm a couple of years back. When I got to him, yeah, he didn't look very good. So we soaked him. He started to come around a bit. Site paramedics showed up, and thanks for that suggestion, Tom. That was a really good idea. And then they brought the paramedics from Cornwall over. And really we had stripped him down a fair bit. He was wet, but he was still dazed. So the heat was still affecting his brain. The paramedics took him into their ambulance, which was air conditioned. They kept him there for 30 minutes. They assessed him. He walked out. He was a brand new guy. And that's the whole chain of care. Is it starts with simple actions, more definitive care, but then he didn't need to go to the hospital because he was cooled down and he was ready to go. And he actually was fine.
It was a remarkable transformation there. So thanks for this, Rob. A couple of key points that I want to hit or reinforce. I don't have the technical background you do, and some of this is my understanding, but one of the key things is hydration, right? And hydration doesn't start at an event when you're feeling thirsty, but actually hydration should be happening even in the days leading up to an event. You should start taking extra fluids in the Wednesday, Thursday, and then starting with setup on Friday, which can be extremely hot and draining, then constantly pound the fluids, so it's a little bit crude, but there's the old adage, like, monitor your urine output. It should be copious and clear. Like, if you seldom have to go, when you do go, it's kind of thick and very darkly colored, then you're putting yourself at risk. Consume more fluids. And then I think another key point is, you touched on it with the Canadian Armed Forces chart, acclimatization. So then, it's not a surprise where you see some people struggle with the heat when you think about their summer life. They live in an air-conditioned home, they leave to get into an air-conditioned vehicle, and then drive to an air-conditioned workplace. Like, you know what? Start driving with the air conditioning off and a window open. Take some time to go for a walk on a really warm day. Get your body used to it and adjust it to the heat, so it's not such a shock when all of a sudden you're putting on wool and subjecting yourself to the heat at an event weekend. And then I do want to reinforce, this Chrysler's Farm event that Rob referred to. That was a real wake-up call for me. I had a good conversation with Rob and Alan Finney afterwards and talked about how the Canadian Armed Forces deals with heat. They talked about the wet bulb globe index, and I went and looked it up myself and then produced that chart for our unit commanders, or at the very least the Crown Forces staff, shared it with the U.S. command staff, and it's something we monitor. That Fort Erie event of 2022 was a good example. It was probably the hottest Fort Erie any of us experienced, and we did take some mitigations. We told the site we weren't going to animate the siege works, and then little things like I can think of the Sunday battle where we split the Crown forces up into two waves. The first wave, once they were relieved, they were told, go recover in shade and also feel free to go back to camp and kit off. We had more than enough numbers to finish the battle with the second wave, which had been sheltering in shade up to that point. So it's hard, I'd love to see sites move away from having their keynote battle at the hottest part of the day, but you understand their motivation because that's when they have the most public on site too. So then if we can't shift the timing, then we can adjust how we go about approaching our day. And then the other thing I'd say is it's remarkable, maybe a little bit bothersome, is the actions of our troop. We're falling in for 10 in the morning. I'll see guys at 9:10 already fully kitted up, standing out in the full sun in their streets. Like, let's time this, manage this better. Units that do morning orders, if it is an extreme heat weekend, then consider finding a shady spot to do it. Do it in shirt sleeves. The site's not even open to the public yet. We'll give you a pass if everyone's not in uniforms. So we all have to work together to be smart about this. I guess that's we're aware of it. We watch for it. We'll do our best to help manage it, but we need the cooperation of everyone in the hobby. And some of that, yeah, I think it's more in the next slide, but it's the after hours curricular activity. Like you can
Yeah.
undo a whole lot of hard work by not looking after yourself at night. So
Yeah, and we can address that in the next presentation. But I'll go back to two things you said. One is fluids. When I was running half marathons and 30Ks, I'd start taking up on my fluids 4 and 5 days beforehand, regardless of the weather conditions. Some of the races you run in March, some of them you run in July or September, and and you have to basically plan ahead. As we said in the presentation, this hobby is equivalent to something between North American and European football. So it is an athletic event in a way of speaking. So you need to prepare like an athlete would. And then in terms of urine, watching your urine, that's in the next presentation, and we'll talk about that because that is important. And there are factors that can actually hinder your body's ability to urinate properly and thus dehydrate you.
all right, well, we're going to close this one off, and then we do have a second supporting presentation. But thank you for this, Rob. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure as always, Tom. Thank you.